أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وأتموا الحج والعمرة لله فإن أحصرتم فما استيسر من الهدي ولا تحلقوا رؤوسكم حتى يبلغ الهدي محله فمن كان منكم مريضا أو به أذى من رأسه ففدية من صيام أو صدقة أو نسك فإذا أمنتم فمن تمتع بالعمرة إلى الحج فما استيسر من الهدي فمن لم يجد فصيام 3 أيام في الحج و7 إذا رجعتم تلك 10 كاملة ذلك لمن لم يكن أهله حاضر المسجد الحرام واتقوا الله واعلموا أن الله شديد العقاب. صدق الله العظيم. The ayah is 196 of Surah Baqarah. Complete the pilgrimages, major and minor, or complete Hajj and Umrah for the sake of Allah. If you are prevented, then whatever offering for sacrifice you can afford, and do not shave your heads until the offering has reached the place of sacrifice. If any of you is ill or has an ailment of the scalp, he should compensate by fasting or feeding the poor or offering sacrifice. When you are in safety, anyone wishing to take a break between or to benefit between the minor pilgrimage and the major one, meaning Hajj and Umrah, must make whatever offering he can afford. If he lacks the means, he should fast for 3 days during the pilgrimage and 7 days on his return, making 10 days in all. This applies to those whose household is not near Masjidul Haram. Always be mindful of Allah and be aware that He is stern in His retribution. Sadaqallahul Azim. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to be discussing Ayah 196 of Surah Al-Baqarah. Last week we spoke about, alhamdulillah, several ayat, and we did the discussion on suiciding. And along with that, we also we spoke about the order of jihad and what it entailed and why the order of some incidents in the Quran, they're inverted, meaning that something occurred chronologically later, but in the course of mentioning the story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the end before the beginning. We talked about that as well. And we're at a point in the surah when we're speaking about the guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given this ummah, the Bani Ismail. So what are the guidances that we've been given so far? Because half of the surah addresses the faults of the Bani Israel. Then the second half of the surah talks about qualities that the Bani Ismail, meaning those who follow the prophet that came from the descendants of the Bani Israel, meaning Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what are qualities that they need to bring into their life? So number 1 was Tawheed. Number 2 was eating halal. Number 3 was not concealing deen. Number 4 was don't sell deen. Number 5 was abwabul bir, meaning the doors of righteousness. And that was all of the general branches of deen were put together over there. Were put in front of you generally, and then after that it expands out into specifics. So number 6 is qisas, the law of equal retribution. Number 7 is wasiyah, which is Islamic inheritance laws. Number 8, fasting. Number 9, to abstain from gaining wealth through haram means. Number 10, abstaining from bribery, because bribery is forbidden. And number 11, what we talked about last week, is jihad. So this week, inshallah, we're going to be discussing Hajj, and we're going to speak specifically about a person called a muhsir. So where are we in the context of the surah right now? That's something to understand. So a very important door from the doors of righteousness, Ayah 176, Abwabul Bir. One of the greatest acts of bir, of righteousness, is Hajj. And so much reward has been mentioned for Hajj Mabrur, an accepted Hajj. A person will return sinless after that. They'll return as if the day their mother gave birth to them, when a person returns from an accepted Hajj. Okay? And Hajj, it was made fard in the third year after Hijrah, the year the Battle of Uhud took place, but there wasn't really general safety of passage until the year six, when the of Hudaybiyah took place. Okay, and because Hajj is connected to Mecca and the Kaaba, and these things have been discussed earlier in the surah, some rulings of Hajj, they've already come. During the discussions of Ibrahim alayhi salam, speaking about the construction of the Kaaba and the Qibla, which all occurred earlier in the surah. So ayahs 125 to 128, they speak about Maqam Ibrahim, Tawaf, and other things. Ayah 158, it speaks about sa'i, because these are things that a person needs to do in Hajj. In Hajj, you need to make tawaf. In Umrah, you need to make tawaf. Then after praying, ideally, you should pray by the Maqam Ibrahim. And then Ayah 158, it speaks about sa'i, running between Safa and Marwa. That should also be done. Now, ayahs 196 to 203, they'll present more rulings about Hajj. Excuse me. Okay. So how do we connect the ayahs? Because I mean, one of the big focus we've had throughout this series is connecting the ayat to one another, right? Because it's something that is very important. Because the Quran, it's strung together like pearls, and everything it fits, but a person has to think deeply sometimes in order to find the connection. So this ayah that we're covering today was revealed 1 year before the ayahs that were discussed last week, right? So ayah 196, chronologically, the thing that it was revealed earlier, but when other ayat were revealed later on, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was told, recite these ayahs before this ayah. Okay, so now the reason that their order within the Quran is flipped, again, let's just go over this one time. It's to highlight different aspects and lessons. If the events were mentioned in chronological order, lessons would be lost. So there's two things that are taught here. One of them is the order of what a person should do when they're muhsir, what we're going to talk about today, when they're prevented from doing Hajj. Another thing that's discussed in this are rules of jihad, of fighting in certain circumstances, right? And we talked about that last week. You can go and you can see the video as well, and so it's not taken out of context. But if it was mentioned in the order that occurred, one of the lessons may have been lost. Particularly speaking about jihad, that might have been lost because a person will just think it's the end of the story. So the same thing happens in ayah 67 to 73 of Surah Baqarah. There is a murder that took place, and the people wanted to find out who committed the murder. So then Musa alayhi salam made dua to Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, sacrifice a calf. But Allah's order to sacrifice the calf is mentioned first, the murder is mentioned later on. Okay? So now rulings of Hajj, they are going to come up in are coming up in ayah 196. So there's another reason that the order is flipped. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala began speaking about Hajj and Umrah, what a person does when they're prevented, then in the middle, chronologically, what happened? Ayahs about jihad were revealed. And then after that, the next few ayat, I think it's 8 ayahs, they're all discussing Hajj. So when the order is flipped, there's more flow as well. Another connection that there is that the months of Hajj, they began after Ramadan. If you go back a few ayahs, Ramadan was discussed. After the rulings of fasting, Hajj rulings are discussed, but laws of fighting during the months of Hajj were also brought up due to it being related. And between Ramadan and Hajj, there are sacred months. Dhul Qa'dah and Dhul Hijjah, and fighting in those are haram. So another connection. One other thing that we could take is that an accepted Hajj and Umrah are amongst the best of good deeds. And the previous ayah immediately before this spoke about spending in the path of Allah, and that is the best way of helping the servants of Allah. And there's a hint in these ayahs that even in Hajj, continue to give charity, because the ayah before is speaking like there was jihad, jihad, jihad. Then there was an ayah speaking about supporting the cause of Islam financially, and then this ayah comes. So there's a hint in these ayahs as well, speaking about Hajj, to continue giving charity. Just because you're on the journey of Hajj doesn't mean that your charity ends. And in fact, one of the ways for making up for violations in Ihram, and majority of the time, is through sadaqah, either for minor violations of Ihram, a person will just give a little bit of sadaqah, and for larger violations, a person has to sacrifice an animal. So now let's look at this ayah as an overview, and then we'll delve in, inshallah. So ayah 196, again, of Surah Baqarah, that's what we're covering today. So three rulings are mentioned in this ayah, and all of them are interconnected. There's a logical flow to them. So the ayah to ayah, there's a flow, and within the ayah, there's also a logical flow. The first ruling that's discussed is ihsar. What is ihsar? A person is forced to open their ihram without having performed hajj or umrah. And what is ihram? Ihram is not the name of the cloth, the white cloth a person wears, because women, they don't wear the white cloth. Rather, ihram is a state that a person enters into out of honor for the haram, honor for the land that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his infinite wisdom has sanctified from the time that he created the earth. A person puts certain enters the state of ihram and puts certain restrictions upon him or herself, his or herself, right? And in order to get out of it, you need to complete hajj or umrah. But if a person is not able, they're prevented from performing hajj or umrah, what should they do? So the rules of ihsar are going to be covered today. And it's actually really relevant. Sometimes a person, they might be thinking like, what's the point? Why is this mentioned in the Quran? It's not interesting to talk about. Well, this year, there are many people who went for Umrah and were not able to perform Umrah because of the coronavirus, that they got there. Or, I have a colleague, he was going to Umrah. He was at the airport in Detroit, and they said that, we could take you to Jeddah, but nobody is allowed to do Umrah today, from today going forward. So then, for him, this didn't apply because he didn't have his ihram on. But there are people that were already there that were prevented from completing their umrah as well. Okay, so it does happen, and it does happen in the modern day as well. The Quran is for all time. Okay, number two, a person is not forced. Okay, so for the first ruling was ihsar. The second ruling has to deal with a person who's not forced to open their ihram, meaning they're not forced to end the state of ihram. But due to different factors, they have to do something that violates the rules of ihram. They're not opening their ihram, but there's different reasons. Because of that, they have to violate the rules that they put on themselves. And what are those certain restrictions? For example, a person can't wear sewn clothes. A person can't put fragrance on. A person can't approach their spouse. A person can't cut their hair. Okay? So now what happens there? If a person, they don't open their ihram, but they do something that violates the rules of ihram, this necessitates a fidya. A fidya is something that a person has to. It's translated as like a ransom. Like a person has to do something to make up for a mistake that they made. Right? And there's three options for fidya, one of which is sacrificing an animal. So subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions the first two options first. The last thing he mentions is sacrificing an animal, and now we go to the third ruling. Because in the third ruling, this is talking about hajj tamattu' and hajj qiran. And we're going to discuss the three types of hajj today. And the animal sacrifice, Qurbani, it's also necessary in Hajj Tamattu and Hajj Qiran. So these are all discussed as well. So the flow again. The ihsar is mentioned, right? Meaning a person is forced to open their ihram without having performed Hajj or Umrah. Then the second thing is, okay, a person hasn't ended their ihram, but they violated their ihram. And to make up for that, they need to do one of three things. The third thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions is sacrificing an animal. And that goes to ruling number 3, which is that if you perform Hajj Tamattu and Hajj Qiran, you need to sacrifice an animal. Okay. So now what is the background of revelation, the Shan Nuzul or the Sababun Nuzul? After the kuffar, they retreated with their hopes dashed from the battle of Ahzab. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, the hadith is in Bukhari, "Naghzuhum wa la yaghzunana." Now we'll go and we'll attack them. They're not going to attack us anymore. We broke in their back, their strength. They put all of their efforts, and they pooled all of their resources to fight us in the battle of Ahzab, also known as the battle of Khandaq, and they were unsuccessful. Therefore, now it's our turn. So sometime later, after this, Rasulullah ﷺ saw a dream in which he and the Sahaba radiallahu anh were performing Umrah peacefully. So this caused the desire of performing Umrah to come to the forefront of the Muslims' hearts and minds. And the Kaaba was a universal place of worship. Like I said last week, is like bring your own idol, right? So everybody was allowed. So Muslims also assumed that they wouldn't be prevented from performing Umrah, especially if they went in one of the sacred months in which fighting was forbidden. So in the year 6 after Hijrah, in the month of Dhul Qa'dah, right before Dhul Hijjah, they set out for Umrah from Dhul Hulayfa. When the Meccans heard that the Muslims were coming, they made a firm resolve to not allow them to perform Umrah. Look, they've had three big battles. The battle of Badr was a decisive victory for the Muslims. And the Muslims were those who were expelled from Mecca, right? Primarily, I mean, they were Ansar, but the leaders of the Muslims were those who were expelled from Mecca. Now, in battle number 1, they decisively defeat the Quraysh, those people who expelled them. Battle number 2, the Battle of Uhud, was not a loss for the Muslims. Everybody says that it's a loss. Yes, it wasn't a decisive victory, but the objective of the mushrikeen was to put an end to Islam altogether, to conquer Medina, but they had to turn back. Yes, they inflicted a lot of damage on the Muslims, but it wasn't a overwhelming defeat. It was in a gray area. It wasn't a clear victory. It wasn't a clear defeat. Somewhere in the middle. The Muslims lost a lot, but they prevented the kuffar from obtaining their objectives. And then number 3 was this battle of Ahzab, where a bunch of tribes, led by the Quraysh, they laid siege to Medina for several weeks, and they weren't able to penetrate. They weren't able to invade Medina, and as a result, they were. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he eventually sent like a windstorm, and because of that they fled. So now, after all of this happens, now for the Muslims to come to Mecca and perform Umrah, this is a huge insult to the Meccans. They felt that it was a huge slight and an insult, so we're not going to allow you to perform Umrah. To summarize, the Muslims arrived at Hudaybiyah. Hudaybiyah is nearby Mecca, but it's before Mecca. And negotiations, they began. One of the conditions of the treaty was that the Muslims would return to Medina that year without having performed Umrah, but they could return the next year to perform it. But there were other conditions, like without most of their weapons. They could only bring sheathed swords. They could only stay for 3 days. Okay, so this ayah 196 that we're going to discuss today was revealed regarding this situation, ihsar. One other thing that I'll say is the fact that this ayah was revealed at this time shows that it wasn't for the obligation of Hajj or Umrah. That had already occurred in the year 3 Hijri. And this whole incident, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, occurred in the year 6 Hijri. So some people from this ayah, as we may mention a little bit, they say that Umrah is also fard. But what the majority of the scholars respond with is that Umrah is not fard. Like Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, etc. They say that it's not fard. Along with that, there's a hadith in Abu Dawood in which Imam Abu Dawud, he says that one of the Sahabis, he said that I heard from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that Umrah wasn't fard, right? Or it wasn't wajib. But some people, from the words of this ayah, they infer that Umrah is also fard. But we say, no, the obligation of Hajj, it came before, 3 years before. And the ayah is in Surah Ali Imran on the first page of the 4th juz. وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ مَنْ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. So now let's talk about the issue at hand, and that issue is ihsar. Okay, so Hajj and Umrah, they should be done for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure and Allah's pleasure only. There should be no other agenda. But once either of these is started, so it's not fard to ever do Umrah. It's good to do. And Hajj, it's fard for a person once in a lifetime if they can afford it. But even in terms of a nafli Hajj, when either one is started, it becomes wajib to complete it. But starting doesn't mean that you just sit on the plane. Starting means that you enter the state of ihram. If they're left out in the middle, qada must be done, even for nafil hajj according to the Hanafis, right? For nafil hajj, there's a difference of opinion with the other scholars in regards to hajj. But if umrah is left in the middle, qada needs to be made. And we learned that from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life as well, that they were prevented from making Umrah in the year 6. So in the year 7, they came back and they made Umrah again. It's called Umratul Qada, the Umrah of Qada, the makeup Umrah. But now sometimes a valid excuse comes up that prevents a person from completing their Hajj. Again, there's a lot of differences of opinion about these things. I'm going to, inshallah, touch on these a little bit. Okay. But like whatever school of thought you follow, whatever scholar you follow, just ask them and they'll tell you. And inshallah, none of us will ever be put in the situation of being a muhsir, somebody prevented from doing Hajj or Umrah. But sometimes a valid excuse, it comes up and it prevents a person from completing their Hajj. So how could they open their ihram? Because ihram has all of these restrictions, and every time you violate the restriction, you have to give sadaqah or you have to sacrifice an animal. So this ayah answers the question. An animal must be sacrificed, right? So according to the Shafi'is, Malikis, and Hanbalis, the animal should be sacrificed where the person is stopped. Because in the Quran, it says that when the animal reaches mahilla, its place. So these three scholars, meaning the schools of thought, the Shafi'is, Malikis, Hanbalis, they interpret mahilla to be the place where the person is stopped. That's the place where the animal is destined to go to. And then they say that it's necessary to shave the head to get out of ihram. This also you could get from the ayah, and I'll point on these when we actually start reading the ayah. And then they say that qada is not necessary, right? According to some. Now, according to the Hanafis, the animal must be sacrificed in the precincts of the haram. So they say that the word mahilla, it means that the animal needs to be taken to the haram by someone else, or by this person if they can, or send it with somebody else. And in that time, if there wasn't communication, send it with somebody, tell them do it on such and such day. After the animal is sacrificed within the precincts of the haram, then the ihram comes to an end. But according to Imam Abu Yusuf, because the Hanafis, they have three big scholars within them. People say like, oh, I follow Rasulullah, I don't follow Imam Abu Hanifa or Imam Malik or Imam Shafi'i. But the thing is, these schools, first of all, they just stem from the Sahabas. With the Sahabas, they had differences of opinion. If you look at the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, it's based on the fiqh of Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu an and Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala an, along with many of the students of Aisha radiallahu anha. They also had quite a big of influence in there. The Malikis and the Shafi'is, they're based on Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu and Zayd bin Sabit radiallahu an. Okay, so even within these schools too, there's many. The probably the famous person, he gets credit, and there's a principle that it's said the one who codifies something, they get credit for it, right? So like the Declaration of Independence, who's the author of it? It's Thomas Jefferson. But that thought process that had been coming for since the beginning of the Renaissance, that was not Thomas Jefferson. There were many people that contributed to that thought, and Thomas Jefferson was the one that summarized it and presented it to the world in a very nice manner. Similarly, this fiqh is the fiqh of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. Who did they learn from? They learned from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But later, Imam Abu Hanifa or Imam Malik or Imam Shafi'i or Imam Ahmad, what they did was they came and they codified it well. They presented it in an organized manner, right? Like, for example, like this tafseer that we're doing. Is it my tafseer? No. Like I look in 8, 9, 10 books. I'll look. I put the information together. Sometimes I add my own thoughts, but a lot of it is just presenting information in a manner that people can go ahead and benefit from. So this is what these mazahib did as well. So, but even within them, they have big figures. So in the Hanafi school, there's three big scholars. They're called the Aimma Thalatha: Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, and Imam Muhammad. Okay, and you'll be surprised to know that much of the school of the Hanafis, the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa is not taken. Rather, the opinions of Imam Abu Yusuf are taken, or the opinions of Imam Muhammad are taken, or the opinions of Imam Zufar, who was another figure in the school. Or sometimes, when later on, for certain reasons, the rulings of another school were taken, like the rulings of the Maliki school, or the rulings of the Shafi'i school. And an example of this is in the partition in India. In the Hanafi madhab, when a woman's husband disappears, is a huge number of years that they have to wait until they're remarried. Whereas in the Maliki school, it's 4.5 years or 4 years and some. So the ulama of India and Pakistan, they got together and they said that we have to leave the Hanafi mazhab here because we don't worship the Hanafi mazhab. We follow it, right? Or they follow it in India and Turkey and those places. So then we'll take the mazhab of Imam Malik. Why? Because all of the mazahib are correct, right? And all of them are based on the Quran and Sunnah. So, anyways, coming back from that tangent, according to Imam Abu Yusuf, the head needs to be shaved. And all of this is, like I said, I'll point out to it when we read the ayahs. Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad say, no, you don't need to shave the head to get out of ihram. When the animal is sacrificed in the haram, the ihram automatically comes to an end. All three, they agree that qada is mandatory. Now, what's a valid excuse? This is another question. We're saying when a person is prevented from making Hajj or Umrah based on a valid excuse. According to the Shafi'is, Malikis, and Hanbalis, the only valid excuse is an enemy preventing one from going to Hajj or Umrah. So this is somewhere where, in a Corona situation, they would take the Hanafi mazhab. Even if Hajj is missed, then Umrah must be performed in order to get out of Ihram. But according to the Hanafis, anything preventing a person from going to the Haram, going to do their Hajj or Umrah, is considered an uzr. So it could be an enemy, or it could be an accident that left the person injured and they're not able to go, or it could be a sickness, or it could be theft. They're robbed on the way, so now they don't have the funds to go there, or it could be the coronavirus, or it could be an enemy. But no matter what the reason is, when that excuse, the word for excuse in Arabic is in uzur, and in Urdu that's why I say mazirat chahta hu, excuse me, right? So when that uzur it ends, qada must be performed at a later time. Why? Because once you start an action, it's wajib to complete it. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا أَعْمَالَكُمْ. Don't invalidate your actions, okay, your good deeds, okay. Now let's go to the ayah, and inshallah I'll point out those places of disagreement and how those words can be interpreted. And that's why you'll see, because we're talking a little bit about mazahib. It's not about following this madhab or that madhab. 90% of deen, 95% of deen, we're not following any madhab. We're directly following the Quran or the Sunnah. There's only 3 situations where you're going to follow a mazhab or a scholar, and one of those is when you don't know which ayah came first and which ayah came second. So which one do I act on, or which hadith came first, which one came second? It takes an expert to be able to tell you that, and I'm going to hint at this inshallah towards the end of the ayah as well, right? Number 2 is when the word or the ayah has multiple interpretations, all are equally valid in the Arabic language. Now, how do you know which meaning to take? If you're just going to pick up a translation and read it, whatever bias or whatever opinion the author has, he's going to translate it in that manner, right? So it's up for scholars to find other proofs to give one interpretation, to give it more weight. So that's why we follow them, because we may not be able to put in all of the groundwork to determine which it is. And the third is something called istinbat. Istinbat is when you delve deep into the ayah of the Quran and you pull out masail. For example, is it fard in wudu to wash the elbows and wash the ankles? Yes or no? Well, Imam Zufar, rahmatullahi alayhi, he says that it's not fard. You don't have to wash the elbows and you don't have to wash the ankles. You just need to wash up to the elbows. Whereas all of the other imams, they say you need to wash the elbows as well and the ankles as well. They're included. Everybody gets their proof. Both sides get their proof from the word ila, intel. Some say that ila, it includes the ghaya, it includes the end point, and others say no, the word ila, it excludes the end point. It's going up to the muntaha. Okay, so these are things that a regular person can do. That's why we follow the ulama in these things. Another example of this is like a word that has double meaning. So regarding the idda period, and we're going to talk about this in a few weeks. The idda period of inshallah, the idda period of a woman who is divorced, it's 3 cycles, right? So the word is quru, salathata quru is what it says in the Quran. And quru is a word that it has 2 meanings. Quru just means a cycle, so it can mean a cycle of menstruation or a cycle of purity. Now, which do you take? Is the word there's quru? It can mean either one. Is it when 3 cycles of purity pass, or when 3 cycles of menstruation pass? And so the ulama, they go in and they debate about this. And then whichever mazhab a person follows, whichever scholar a person follows, you just take what they say, because you have i'timad and you have confidence on their ability to research and their approach to research. Okay, so now, anyway, moving back. وَأَتِمُّ الْحَجَّ وَالْعُمْرَةَ لِلَّهِ, and complete Hajj and Umrah for Allah. This is leading us into speaking about ihsar. There's an introduction to it. Complete it and don't leave it in the middle. وَأَتِمُّ, complete it. Don't leave it in the middle. If you start it, you gotta complete it. And when you say lillah, li is making something exclusive. Do it just for Allah. And when you're doing it just for Allah, observe all of the etiquettes and have full ikhlas. Ikhlas is the way to gain ihsan. And the last ayah, how did it end? Wa ahsinu inna Allah yuhibbul muhsinin. Do good, do excellence, practice excellence, be a person of ihsan. Allah loves the people of excellence. And if you want to be a person of ihsan, you need to have ikhlas. Right? So there's another connection between the ayahs. Right? And the lam in lillah, it's an ishara, it's a hint towards this. And this is telling us something as well too. That look, Hajj is something that it is very difficult. Even now in this day and age, with all of the modern conveniences that we have, a person still gets physically tired, mentally tired, and frustrated at Hajj, right? And Hajj is so difficult that it was Aisha radiallahu anha, I believe, she asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, men, they go and fight jihad and they're rewarded for that. What about women? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that jihadukum is Hajj. Your jihad, the jihad of women, is Hajj. Meaning it's very, very difficult to do, right? But despite the expenses incurred and the physical difficulties that are born during Hajj, if a person does not have ikhlas and does not do it for Allah, they're not rewarded for it. So we need to be very, very careful to do things with ikhlas. فَإِنْ أُحْصِرْتُمْ فَمَا اسْتَيْسَرَ مِنَ الْهَدِي. Then if you are prevented, then whatever qurbani is easy. That's how it's translated, but what it means is sacrifice the qurbani. Now this is where we get differences of opinion, and you can see from the words both of these are both of these are going to be permissible. Okay, وَلَا تَحْلِقُوا رُؤُوسَكُمْ حَتَّى يَبْلُغَ الْهَدِيُ مَحِلَّهُ, and do not shave your heads until the animal reaches the place of sacrifice. Okay, so now Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, Imam Malik, they say وَلَا تَحْلِقُوا رُؤُوسَكُمْ, do not shave your head حَتَّى. That means at some point you're going to have to shave your head. Okay? يَبْلُغَ الْهَدِيُ مَحِلَّهُ, until the animal reaches, mahilla means its place, right? Its place of sacrifice. Okay? So now, Imam Abu Yusuf, he's with Imam Abu Hanifa on this. But we still have Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad. They say, حَتَّى يَبْلُغَ الْهَدِيُ مَحِلَّ means the place where the animal needs to be sacrificed is the place that you're stopped from doing Hajj. So now when you sacrifice the animal where you are, now it's reached its place. The sacrifice has occurred. Now go back and احلقوا رؤوسكم. You should go ahead and now you should shave your head, because the sacrifice of the animal has occurred at its spot, right? But Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, they also have a very good explanation. What is that? They say that the word mahilla, it's already described to us in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Hajj, ثُمَّ مَحِلُّهَا إِلَى الْبَيْتِ الْعَتِيقِ. The same word, mahilla, ثُمَّ مَحِلُّهَا إِلَى الْبَيْتِ الْعَتِيقِ. Its place of sacrifice is the sacred or the ancient house, meaning the Kaaba, the Haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in another place, in Surah An'am, هَدِيًا بَالِغَ الْكَعْبَةِ, a sacrificial animal that reaches the Kaaba. So they say mahilla means the haram. So you see the word here is mahilla. Both interpretations are okay. But both sides are using linguistics, they're using other ayat, they're using ahadith, right? So that this side, so I just said from the linguistic perspective, this is what they took. But Imam Shafi'i and Imam Malik and Imam Ahmad, they have another proof as well. And what is that proof? They say Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the year of Hudaybiyah, he went ahead and he sacrificed his animal where he was, and then he went back, so it doesn't have to get to the haram. But the Hanafis, they answer and they say, well, Hudaybiyah is very big. Part of it is within the haram, part of it is outside of the haram. Looking at the ayahs saying that the mahil, the place of sacrifice, is within the haram, the assumption will be made that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made sure he was in the part of Hudaybiyah that was the haram when he sacrificed his animal. Wallahu a'lam. But now let's move to the second part. So now what the Hanafis, they say, or not the Hanafi, meaning Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf, they say, and Imam Muhammad, they say you do not shave the head either. You don't have to shave the head. The reason for that is they say that when the animal reaches its place of sacrifice, and when it's sacrificed within the haram, what وَلَا تَحْلِقُوا رُؤُوسَكُمْ is telling you is that don't shave your head until that time, because the restrictions of ihram apply until then. After the animal is sacrificed, then the restriction is lifted and your ihram is done. Whether you shave your head or not, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. Your ihram is open. So again, this is a good interpretation. Both can be taken, right? Now, why? Let's go with the assumption that it has to be taken to the Kaaba. Let's see why. Why would an animal ever have to go to the Haram and be sacrificed? So what some scholars explain is that for a sacrifice to be considered an ibadah, it needs to be done in a blessed time or a blessed place, right? So, for example, in the days of Dhul Hijjah, that's why we do Qurbani. Or at the time that a child is born, we do a sacrifice of an animal for the Aqiqah. It's a blessed time, right? If it's not done in a blessed time, then it needs to be done in a blessed place. And in the case of a muhsir, they're completing the sacrifice out of its time. Its time is what? Post Hajj or Umrah. And now you're doing it before. So, in Arabic, they say that "Ma la yudrakul kul, la yutrakul kul." That which cannot be fully achieved, don't leave all of it, right? That "Ma la yudrakul kul, la yutrakul kul." That don't, if you can only get partial, even take partial. So the Hanafis, they say that you have to, or all the Hanafis, they say that you have to send it to a sacred place, even though you can't do it at a sacred time. Okay, so now moving to the second masala that we're going to discuss, the second ruling, the mubihat, things that prevent ihram. Okay, so when a person carries out something that violates the laws of ihram due to an excuse. So now let's go to a hadith in Bukhari. While waiting in Hudaybiyah at the same time, because this ayah was revealed at that time, so there's several things here, right? So now, while waiting in Hudaybiyah, the treaty and negotiations are going on, and Usman radiallahu anhu was in Makkah and all of that for several days. The Muslims, they were prevented from performing Umrah. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw a Sahabi named Ka'ab bin Ujra radiallahu anhu, and he was cooking. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam noticed that he had lice in his hair. Now imagine how many lice he had that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was able to see it. And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked if they're bothering him, and he said, yeah, they're bothering me a lot. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, shave your head, which is not allowed in ihram. And then to make up for this by either, now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave him three options. The hadith is in Bukhari. Fasting 3 days, sacrificing an animal, or feeding 6 poor people. Okay? And now what is the rule? The rule is, if a person has a valid excuse which forces them to do something contrary to ihram, like in his case, Ka'b radiallahu anh, he had lice, it was bothering him, so you could consider it a sickness or pain. So he had to do something to alleviate that. He had to shave his head, right? Or if a person has to go to the doctor, or there's many valid excuses that are going to come up, right? the three options apply, meaning you have a choice of doing any of these three: fasting 3 days, sacrificing an animal, or feeding six poor people. But if the violation of ihram occurs without an excuse, the only thing allowed is sacrifice, dam, qurbani, right? Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, continuing with the ayah, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ بِهِ أَذًى مِنْ رَأْسِهِ فَفِدْيَةٌ. Whoever from amongst you is sick, مريضا أو به أذى من رأسه, or they have an ailment on their head, they have pain in their head, ففدية, their fidya is what? Number one, min صيام, it's fasting. Or number two, أو صدقة, charity. Or number three, أو نسك, sacrifice. So فمن كان منكم مريضا أو به أذى من رأسه ففدية من صيام أو صدقة أو نسك. Now notice when I told you that Rasulullah said, fast 3 days, sacrifice an animal, or feed six poor people. Nowhere in the Quran does it give numbers, does it quantify these. So now we see how the hadith does tafsir of the Quran. We have to look at the hadith in order to understand the Quran, right? Because that incident, it occurred at the same time that this ayah was revealed, around the same time. Now, this part of the ayah, it ends with sacrifice. So chronologically, we have siyam is mentioned, then sadaqatin, and then we have nusuk. Right? Chronological wouldn't be the word, but in order of its appearing in the nas of the Quran, right? Oh, nusuk, it ends with sacrifice rather than ending with fasting or sadaqah, because the next portion of the ayah discusses two types of hajj that require sacrifice. So now overall there's three types of hajj. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us all to go to hajj and umrah soon. For some reason the chat isn't working today. Otherwise I would have asked you guys a quiz and see if you knew what are the three types. And see, in the description of this video, I put like a PDF, just with this with the notes. So if you want this information, it's there, inshallah. Okay, you could just click on that link in the description of this video. All right. So then, anyways, the three types of Hajj. Number one is ifrad. Number two is called tamattu'. Number three is called qiran. So numbers 2 and 3, meaning tamattu' and qiran, they can only be performed by a person who lives outside of the miqat. And I will describe this in a minute, or explain this in a minute. What is a miqat? So one living outside of the miqat is referred to as an afaqi. Okay, one thing to keep in mind is the Arabs of Jahiliyyah, they thought that combining Hajj and Umrah was a sin. And this ayah is going to make it clear that it only applies to those that are living within the miqat. Now, what are these three terms? One is called haram, the other is called hil, and the third is called afaq. So the haram is a sanctified area that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made sanctified from the time He created this world. And there are many restrictions there. For example, animals can't be killed. I mean, they can be sacrificed, but they can't be hunted. And even wildlife, plant life, and trees and all, they can't be cut. So there's many restrictions in the haram. Why? Because that's sanctified land. And and doing these things are contrary to the sanctity of the place. And what is in the haram? The Kaaba. Outside of the haram, there's a portion that's called hil. So the surrounding areas, those that are surrounding the haram, they're called hil. So now all of the restrictions that apply in the haram don't apply there, right? But because of the fact that it's connected to the haram, it still has some honor. It's like a buffer zone. That whole land is hallowed land. So because of that, the hil, they go all the way, and their outer boundaries are called the miqat. And there's different miqat in every direction. So depending where you're coming from, to perform Hajj or Umrah, you're gonna cross a different miqat, right? So the miqat, these are the boundaries. Inside of that is the hil, and inside of the hil is the haram. And outside we get to our third term, and the third term is afaq, which means everywhere else. So a person who lives inside of the miqat, right? But not inside of the haram, they're referred to as a hilli, somebody who lives inside of the miqat. Now, the people who live inside of the miqat, their life, like a hilli, their life is normal. But the hill, it has a special restriction too. And that is a person cannot enter the hill without, they can't enter without ihram if they have the intention of umrah or hajj, and they're quite far from Mecca, right? And why, one reason that comes to mind, wallahu a'lam, is that the haram is so sanctified that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want the honor of the haram um to be dishonored. I guess the honor, like the sanctity of the haram, should not be violated in any way. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you a big buffer zone, that you need to start your ihram from here and get yourself in the habit of observing those practices that need to be practiced within the haram, right? So if a person were to cross the miqat without being in a state of ihram, then they'd be sinful. Okay, and afaq is from everywhere else. So people living inside of the miqat, meaning hillis and people who live inside of the haram itself, for them, they're not allowed to do the two types of hajj we're about to discuss, hajj qiran and hajj tamattu'. They're only allowed to do hajj ifrad. But afaq, anybody from coming from outside of the miqat, they're allowed to do tamattu' or qiran. So hajj tamattu', what is this? In afaqi, somebody coming from outside, they'll put on ihram with the intention of doing umrah during the months of hajj. And what are the months of hajj? Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah. After reaching Makkah, he or she will perform their umrah and they'll take off their ihram. After this, they'll stay in Makkah. And on the 8th of Dhul Hijjah, they'll put on their ihram, they'll put on the ihram of hajj in Makkah itself. They don't need to go to Masjid Aisha to Tan'im. In Makkah, they're going to put on the ihram of hajj and they'll go ahead and they'll perform hajj. A qurbani is mandatory for a person who does tamattu'. What type of qurbani is it? I'll mention it because there's a difference of opinion in a minute. For hajj qiran, in afaqi will put one ihram for both hajj and umrah. Outside of the miqat, you put on this ihram, of course. Then, according to the Hanafis, you reach Makkah and you perform tawaf qudum, which is, qudum means tawaf of arrival. This is sunnah, according to all of the imams. It's sunnah and it's to honor the Kaaba, that you've arrived. Like how we pray tahiyatul masjid, you do tawaf qudum. Then after this, you do the tawaf of umrah. Then you do the sa'i of umrah. Then you stay in Makkah until hajj in ihram. You haven't opened your ihram. After Arafah, you perform tawaf ziyarah, then you do the sa'i of hajj. Okay? But some scholars, they allow that you could do the sa'i of hajj with your tawaf qudum, because you can't ever do sa'i alone. Sa'i has to come after a tawaf, right? So some scholars, they say that you can do it earlier, you could do it after your tawaf qudum. That's what I did when I went for hajj. Okay, so qurbani is mandatory for the qarin, the one who's doing qiran. Qurbani is mandatory. Now Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayhi, he says that this qurbani is to make up, or it's basically the price that you're paying for being allowed to combine hajj and umrah in one trip. Okay, therefore the one who sacrifices the animal, they're not allowed to partake from the animal. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, he says this is a qurbani of shukr, that you are thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing me to do hajj and umrah together, because it's hard to come individually for each one. You're allowing me to do it in one trip, and in the case of hajj qiran, in one ihram. So I'm sacrificing this animal, and according to all, it has to be in the haram, but I'm sacrificing this animal out of shukr, out of gratitude for you, ya Allah. Therefore, the one who does the qurbani, they're allowed to eat it as well. They're allowed to eat from it, just like on Eid al-Adha. We perform the sacrifice as a religious duty, but we're allowed to eat from the animal as well. Okay, but now anyway, according to the Shafi'is, Malikis, and Hanbali, there's a different tartib in Hajj Qiran, a different rule. When you arrive in Makkah, you're only going to perform tawaf qudum. You're not going to perform tawaf of umrah. Tawaf qudum, and this is sunnah. After that, you stay in ihram. You perform hajj. Then you perform tawaf on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. and then you follow this with sa'i. So the Shafi'is, Malikis, Hanbalis, they say that this tawaf and sa'i will suffice for both Hajj and Umrah. This is called tadakhul, that it's all come into one, right? So according to Hanafis, if you do Hajj Qiran, you're gonna have to do two tawaf minimum, three ideally, because you're gonna do tawaf qudum, because it's sunnah, and then you're gonna do two sa'is. According to the Shafi'is, Malikis, and Hanbalis, you're going to do minimum. You're gonna do ideally two tawafs, tawaf qudum, and then tawaf ziyarah, the tawaf of Hajj, and you're gonna do one sa'i. But at minimum, you're just gonna do one tawaf and one sa'i. And again, for them, this is that Qurbani is mandatory for the Qarin, right? So that everybody, all the Imams, they agree upon it. Okay. Now, how to express gratitude or to make up for doing tamattu or qiran. Okay, people living in the hill they're allowed to do Hajj Ifrat. Why? Because making Umrah is easy for them. They're close by, as compared to Afaqi. So Allah explains that in the ayah as well. At the end, ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ أَهْلُهُ حَاضِرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. So to express shukr over the bounty of doing Hajj and Umrah together, Qurbani is required. Sacrifice of an animal is required. But there are people who can't afford it. So what do? Allah has ordered them to fast 10 days. 3 days during the months of Hajj. So this can be done from the time of Shawwal. But a person has to be in Ihram, and it has to be the Ihram of Hajj. So if a person were to put on their Ihram of Hajj in Shawwal and they intended to do Qiran, they could keep their fast in Shawwal. But it's mustahab, and it's best for it to be the 7th, 8th, and 9th of Dhul Hijjah. And then 7 fasts are going to take place after Hajj is completed. Okay, now there's a difference of opinion here too between Imam Shafi'i and Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Shafi'i says they have to be done after you return home. Imam Abu Hanifa says you can still be in Makkah while you're doing them. You may say, well, what if you live in Makkah? It wouldn't apply because people from Makkah, they're not allowed to do Hajj Ifrad anyway. So they wouldn't have to be in a situation where they're going to do these 10 fasts. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِذَا أَمِنْتُمْ, when you become secure. From what? From those roadblocks and those difficulties, those things that were prevented you from doing Hajj or Umrah. Or they weren't there for you in the first place. You have safety of passage. فَمَنْ تَمَتَّعَ بِالْعُمْرَةِ إِلَى الْحَجِّ, the one who takes the benefit of Umrah with Hajj. So the word here used is tamattu. Qiran isn't mentioned in the Quran, but tamatta here is not used as an istilahi technical term. It's used as a linguistic term here, meaning doing Hajj and Umrah together. From the hadith, we learned that there's Hajj Qiran. Qiran means to join two things. Or there's Hajj Tamattu, meaning that you're gonna separate between the two, but you're gonna do it on one trip. The word in the Quran is tamatta'a, the one who takes benefit, because that's what tamattu means, to take benefit of Umrah with Hajj, meaning he combines them, whether that be in one ihram or two ihrams, but it's gonna be done in one trip. فَمَسْتَيْسَرَ مِنَ الْهَدِي, then whatever qurbani is easy, that's what's due. Right? Out of gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing us to have done such a momentous act of worship in one trip, where usually it would have required two. And that trip would include hardship and financial aspects and everything, financial burden, right, or expense. That Allah says, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ, but the one who isn't able to find the animal to sacrifice, فَصِيَامُ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ فِي الْحَجِّ, they should fast 3 days during Hajj. وَسَبْعَةٍ إِذَا رَجَعْتُمْ. So see again, now Imam Shafi'i, he says, إِذَا رَجَعْتُمْ, and 7 after you return. Raja'tum means after you return. So that means you have to return home. It makes sense what he's saying. What does Imam Abu Hanifa say? He says, إِذَا رَجَعْتُمْ مِنَ الْحَجِّ, after you return from Mina, after you return back to Makkah, you could start it right then and there. So again, the Arabic, the word, the language, it allows for both interpretations, right? تِلْكَ عَشَرَةٌ كَامِلَةٌ, these are 10 complete fasts, right? And what this means is the ones after Hajj, those 7 that you're doing after Hajj, they're deficient in reward. Person may think, well, they're less virtuous than the 3 that I did during Dhul Hijjah. You'll still be rewarded for them. They're 10 complete. ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ أَهْلُهُ حَاضِرِ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. This combining of Hajj and Umrah is for the one whose family does not live by Masjid al-Haram, meaning you're an afaqi, you're not a person who lives in the Haram, and you're not a hilli. وَاتَّقُوا and fear Allah, follow His orders, avoid sinning in the days of Umrah and Hajj. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ, and know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is severe in punishment. So to put on ihram is a sign that one is entering the court of Allah. To be in the court of the king and to commit sins is a great offense. I want to just end by mentioning one thing. Which is better? Hajj Qiran, Hajj Tamattu. Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayhi, he says the Hajj Tamattu is better. And Imam Abu Hanifa, he says the Hajj Qiran is better, right? Because it's more difficult. That's why there's more virtue associated. The thing is, some people, what they do is they'll just look at the, you know, zahiri word of a hadith, and a person, they won't know Arabic, and they'll just pick up, they think the only Bukhari, Muslim are the only books that have Sahih hadith and nothing else, and they'll go ahead and they'll pick up one of them and they'll say, oh, you have to, tamattu is better, and people who believe that Quran is better, they're foolish. So Imam Tahawi rahmatullahi alayhi, who was another scholar who was at the level of these other muhaddithin like Imam Muslim and Imam Tirmidhi, etc., he wrote hundreds of pages of research about this issue and establishing that Quran is better. So there's a contemporary scholar, and he's originally Syrian, and he was living in Saudi, and these crackdowns and stuff occurred, so he moved to Turkey. Probably one of the foremost scholars of hadith living today. His name is Sheikh Muhammad Awama, hafidhahullah. So he writes under, or he writes, speaking about Imam Tahawi writing this hundreds of pages about this. He said, fihi ibra wa abara. In this there's lessons, and there's abara means tears. There's lesson. Why? Look at how much research needs to be done, and it's not just a simple thing. I just look at the words of one hadith and I say that everybody else is, nobody's following the Quran and Sunnah, and these people, they're all backwards, and they're following these scholars, and they're not following Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said there's a ibra, that things are deeper, but he said there's a abra as well. There's tears. When you read this, you see how dedicated and how the people of the past were to academic honesty and pursuit of knowledge, and why to find out really what it is that Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted and intended and instructed us to do. And where are people like that today? So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people of knowledge. I don't know, the video might look a little bit choppy. I'm not sure. I think my connection is good. I apologize for that if that was the case or the audio was off. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our gathering. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.